Welcome
Good
to
morning.
Capitals Uncovered, the Pelle, Neroth and Martin Sieff show. We're going to talk about an East German dissident today. Because a lot of the things that we talk about are the current news, but of course, news has its roots in history. And I think that a lot of people in Western Europe, so their conviction that the Russian war is fought, it's a moral and just war, is because I think they really think Russia is the Soviet Union, and there's no
Yes,
change. And
absolutely.
yeah, but of course it isn't. It's a much better place than the Soviet Union, much freer and much more prosperous. But conversely, my suspicion, and I've been trapped by this. We look at Russia today and extrapolate and think that the Soviet Union was probably better than it was because it was like today's Russia. But Martin, who was in the trenches of the Cold War, and Dirk as well, could probably testify that it wasn't so. It was much more oppressive. And I think that we talk lightly about words like dissidents among us in the West now, in Europe, people getting debanked and so on. But what happened in the Stalinist period and after in the East Bloc in Russia and its satellite states, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, was worse. So without further ado, we're going to launch into the life and times of Stefan Heym, and maybe we can find a way to show that it illuminates the times we're in now. Martin, maybe you could start off. Who is this guy, and what did he do, and why is he important?
He is the story of the 20th century, Pele. He was one of the great dissidents against Nazi Germany in the 1930s. He served in the US Army in World War II. His family were killed in the Nazi Holocaust. After the war, he wrote one of the great books of American 1940s, 50s post-war literature about World War II in the East, West, in the European theater of operations, The Crusaders. He then ran afoul of Senator Joe McCarthy and became a non-person in the United States. His very existence was rubbed out in the United States. He ended up living in East Germany. He was falsely accused, as Dirk, who is an expert on the subject, is going to explain to us, very falsely accused of being a supporter of Stalin. It was another big, fat, dirty lie. He was one of the leading dissidents in East Germany for for almost 40 years. All his work was written in Germany, but originally written in English, then translated into German. He became a major literary figure in Germany in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. His work is of outstanding quality. He was an admirer of the great English dissident, 18th century dissident Daniel Defoe, and wrote a classic novella even about him. His range was extraordinary. He wrote extensively on German and Jewish issues. He's a wonderful writer. He can be compared in literary quality and in insight and in sheer wit to Philip Roth in the United States and to John le Carré in Britain. I stand to be corrected by Dirk, but I, in his own lifetime, I believe, and hopefully still now, he was a figure of real literary consequence in Germany. He became a trenchant critic of neo-resurgent capitalism in the 1980s and 1990s. He finally died on a visit to Israel, of all things, at the age of 89 in 2001. Personally, I don't believe he's dead at all because he was one of those indestructible people who basically go on forever. If George Orwell had lived to the age of 86 or 89 rather than dying in his mid-40s, as he did, he might have had a life and career comparable in impact at the time and certain literary achievements, even beyond what he did achieve, which was extraordinary, to Stefan Heym. Yet Heym is totally unknown in Britain, totally unknown in the United States, though his work has been translated, was published in easily available paperback in Britain as early as the 1980s, and is very easy and accessible. He's a much easier reader than a pompous old fart like Thomas Mann, for example. Yeah, the danger in reading Stefan Heym is you must never read him when you're on a public transportation or in public anywhere. Exactly, Dirk knows exactly what I'm about to say because you will laugh uncontrollably and make embarrass yourself at every time you turn a page. He is that funny and he is that good. But that's just my view. Dirk, take it from here.
Yeah, no, I listened with completely. That you got it. You hit the nail on the head. What I didn't know, I got to know from you when we had our first talk about it, was that Stefan Heym was writing in English originally, and then it was translated to German. I consider him a masterful writer. And as you said, he's very readable. And then so some, if you can read some people, for example, on Amazon reviews, and they get somewhat arrogant because they people say it's so easy to read. It's not highbrow intellectual, and it's complete bullshit. Because, for example, one of the books I really love. There are two books from Stefan Heym in my top 10 list for literature, not for, I mean, most of the books I read are factual stuff, but this is a Hasva, and I talked to my wife, and we were throwing away about 4/5 of our books when we moved out of our home because we had 3 rooms full of books, and decided finally to get rid of them because what do you do with them? You read them one time, 2 times, and then they stand behind you. That's about it.
Yes.
And but this book, both of us, when we got to Ahasver, that is the title in German. I think in English it's The Wandering Jew or something like
Yes,
that.
that is correct. Yes, that's the
Yeah.
one.
So Ahasver is so we read that. And both of us considered it, and my wife has read much more literature than me. And we both considered it a masterpiece. It's from the construction. And as you said, when I read it, there's a scene in it. It's Ahasver is about what is called the Eternal Jew. So he's a friend of Jesus. They know each other, and Ahasver is the revolutionary. He considers Jesus should not always be so nice and taking everything literally, but should be more revolutionary against the Romans. And when Jesus is on his way to the crucifixion, Ahasver denies him because he's angry with Jesus to stand in the shade, and then Jesus sentences him, so to speak. There's a spell on Ahasver that he has to wander through the times. And Heim uses that wonderfully in a three separate stories in the book, and one is Ahasver telling his story. It starts with the words in German "Ich falle," so he's a fallen angel and he's falling. And the second is during the Reformation in Germany. He's together with a poet. And he's always together with Lucifer. And Lucifer is the devil in a way that Lucifer is always on the side of let's say, of the government, so of the power. Whereas Ahasver is always the revolutionary, like Stefan Heym was. And that is the reason why he is, I can only say, for me, Stefan Heym is one of the it's a marvelous life that he led. If you look at it,
Yes.
he's never bowing to power, never. And he's a socialist. He's a committed socialist, but he's so much for free speech, for speaking out, that he never got into the vicinity like so many other writers in the GDR to be calculating about what you can say or not. He's always there so he's standing out still in that. But the point was, there's a scene in this, in the end, there's a conversation began, the Ahasver is there through 600 years. In the end, he's conferring with, again, with a scientist in Israel, and the other guy, Beifus is his name, who appears also through the centuries. Beifus is the head of the scientific department for non-religious affairs. I don't know how to call it in English. Yeah, didn't exist in the GDR, but it's a dialectic materialistic outfit and then the Lucifer, who's called Leuchtentrager, which is just the German translation of Lucifere, that means carry the light. Yeah, so Leuchtentrager is the same. They take this poet, this other guy, Beifuß, and they carry him. They carry together. They carry him through a hole in a wall, which smells like sulfur, and they levitate and they fly over over the wall.
Yes.
So left Lucifer, on the right side it's Ahasver, and in the middle is this East German science, and that is described in the language of the Stasi, which I read a whole lot of Stasi files, and it was so funny that I was laughing out loud when you said, "Don't read it, don't read it in a subway, or don't read it in a bus." Or so I really had to laugh when I read it, because it was marvelous. It was, in nuances. It was not plain, not flat humor or so. It was because Heym described this event, which was metaphysical. He described it in the wording of a quite dumb Stasi person who's writing a report on what he
Yes.
saw, and of course he cannot say that. And it hits the nail on the head in a way that I rarely saw anywhere else. It's marvelous, humoristic piece. And that is the thing that I cannot forget this scene. Yeah, it is so well written, but it's not the only thing. I mean, we can go on. The other book that I really love is Lenz oder die Freiheit. It's in German. It's the Lenz Papers, I think, in English. And it's also, these things are always about freedom. They
Yes.
are about being a dissident. And this is about the failed German revolution of 1848. Yeah,
Yes.
but maybe you take again, because I
Well,
don't want to
I
talk
just
all the time. But
uh,
we share this feeling for Stefan Heym. That's
Stefan Heym. I didn't know this, but perhaps no. He was actually he went to America. I mean, he went.
Oh,
He
yes.
was in the 1940s. He went to Chicago, and then he was. And this relates to what you were saying about the Stasi. He was recruited into wartime intelligence. And I'm just going to read here. Heym arrived at Camp Rich in Maryland as one of several hundred Jewish
Ritchie
German-speaking
Boys. Yeah.
refugees, many Jewish, trained in interrogation, order of battle analysis, and what the U.S. Army called military intelligence. His posting was to the mobile radio broadcasting companies, then to the production of Frontpost, the German-language newspaper dropped or distributed across the lines from 1944. He wrote leaflets, scripted loudspeaker broadcasts, and helped run the kind of operation that on the Allied side was conducted with a striking degree of literary self-consciousness. Hans Haber, Klaus Mann, Stefan Heym, etc. All of them were writers. But the point is, you write in the voice of the enemy's institutions. You forge or near forge the typography, the bureaucratic register, the official cadence. You insert this destabilizing fact inside an otherwise plausible document. You assume your reader is hostile, literate, and looking for the seam. You learn that the most effective lie is the one that admits a smaller truth in order to smuggle in a larger lie. And the most effective truth is the one that arrives dressed as a routine communique. And that is the method of one of his books called the King David Report, and it was probably adopted in his 1981 book about the Wandering Jew myth. Is that right?
Yeah.
That is correct.
It's a mastery of words, really. And this is the point where the people misunderstand that when they say, some of the readers, this is something typically German, I would say, that if it's real literature, it's you can hardly understand it. And the same goes for scientific papers. There's so much difference if you read, let's say, Hegel, and if you read Popper. Yeah, Popper is writing in a way that you could call simplistic. And Hegel is it's very hard. And the worst is really Adorno, who I read during my university years. And just to give you an idea, it's very highbrow stuff. But we got 2 pages of Adorno, and it was one sentence. And then we so deconstructed the sentence, and we found that the sentence was not complete. But nobody noticed because you got lost in that sentence anyhow. But everybody said, nobody wanted to say, I didn't get it. What is it about? What is the core thing in here? But then you say, it's very elaborate. And then only a few can understand it. And you don't say that you didn't understand it because you want to belong to the few who can understand it. And so Heym is completely different from that. He's always on the point. And the Ritchie Boys were famous interrogators. And that was, I consider that, there's not much about it. Henry Kissinger was one of them too.
Oh, really?
Yes.
He was, Henry Kissinger was there too. The point you have to understand is that these were a lot of people from German Jewish origin who were capable of understanding the nuances of the language, and they were using all kinds of tricks. Not really torture, it's nothing like that. But in the end, a good interrogator is somebody who offers you a coffee and a cigarette. He doesn't pull out your nails. It's a very different, and they were masters in that. And they knew a lot of the background. So they could decipher when somebody was lying to them in German. They would have a lot of non-verbal communication skills also. So it must have been a very real highbrow, very interesting bunch of people who were doing these interrogations.
Dirk, yeah. So it's interesting. He was an intelligence officer, and then he made that part of his whole work in a way, which is to he learned different registers, and he learned to persuade people, and he learned to fake things, and then he returned. He went to he got a Bronze Star, and he left the United States in protest at the Korean War and McCarthyism.
Yes.
Yeah. Why was he betting on the GDR, or did he hate America?
No. He was not. I wouldn't say he hated the McCarthy America, which is very understandable. You have to understand that Stefan Heym is somebody. It's a person who loved freedom, and really he thought, a socialism would be only valuable if it would be possible for every person, every normal German at that time, to express what he saw and be critical and think while talking and talk while thinking, both of that. And that meets real freedom of speech. It needs the possibility to also go astray and then notice that. And that's what a good dialogue is about, that it goes further, that it's not only statement after statement after statement. And you can see from for example, the first problems he got was when they had the first uprisal in East Germany in the 50s. So there's a few days, 5-6 days, where the workers were protesting against not getting enough money. And he was immediately on the side, like Bertolt Brecht, you could say, but he was immediately on the side of the people. So he was a real socialist in that way, and he always was a dissident. And the last book, which I read from him, Column, that is a story of two very high-ranking people in the GDR, and they both close to death. They are in the hospital. And one of them has a bad history with a guy so he's an apparatchik on the high levels, and one is a quite okay guy who wants to come clean with his own story because he betrayed a comrade during the Spanish Civil War. So, but he couldn't publish that in GDR, and he was thrown out of the Writers Guild in GDR because of that book. But that is Stefan Heym, you couldn't put him anywhere and think that he would shut up and not say what he thought. And I have the highest regard of all, because he never, always in trouble. And I think what you can see is, if you look at the young guy, his real name was different. It was not Stefan Heym, it was something Fleek. I don't recall really. It's not important also. But if you look at photos of the young guy and you look at photos of the old guy, the older he gets, the better he looks. Because it's his character coming through his face. He becomes a statue. Yeah. So if you look at the old Stefan Heym, you say, wow, what a face. Yeah. If he's young, he's just, he's also not very handsome. And so It was his character came through in the physical appearance. That tells you something about him as well.
So he was. I mean, let's go forward to the 1970s now. There was a big Wolf Biermann was one of the most famous East German dissidents, and he was kicked out by the regime. I mean, they did different things. They tried to get rid of them, didn't they? And then they took
tried to get rid of him.
Germany.
They tried to get
but some of them didn't want to leave. So he signed a protest against his expatriation, but then he was stayed in East Germany. So why did he stay? I mean, what's the point of doing that?
It's the same with Stefan Heym. There were a lot of people, or Christa Wolf. I think we have to understand that after World War II, to be honest, East Germany was, in a way, the much more interesting country with much more interesting people. In West Germany, you had all these old Nazis and the networks of them, and it was everywhere. In East Germany, fewer of them, and it had the air of it could be something completely different. It could be something completely different from the Nazi time, and it's towards. And I think for me as a leftist, that is because the whole ideas that are socialist they have something to do with a deep desire for justice and also for freedom. That's exactly, that often contradicts. And then this is also a topic that Heym always wrote about, that if you have a career in that system, it tends to go very bad. Many of the people changed into something that they probably did not want to be when it started out. Yeah. That might be true for politics in total, I would say, as an old man now, but for socialists. But East Germany was a place where a lot of people thought, yes, socialism, yes, not the one that we have, not the blockheads that we have. And I think when I talk to East Germans, then because I'm a Wessi, I'm from the West, so they think I'm deeply entrenched with that, but I'm not so deeply entrenched. And then I say, you know, what really killed you is that you didn't understand how valuable your dissidents were. You had such an enormous, great group of very, very brainy, very, very interesting, very freedom-loving, you had the best possibilities to do something different if you would have listened to if you had give them freedom. A lot of them didn't want to go away, and that is Stefan Heym. He didn't want to go outside of Germany. He took the battle because he wanted to make it into the country that he was once dreaming of, and there are quite a lot. And these were the best people we had in '89. These, if we would have had the real possibility to have a round table and have these people together with very interesting people also in the West, it could have been the beginning of something very interesting. But it was just an annexation, and that is what Stefan Heym then afterwards was also writing about. He stayed a dissident. He was not like a lot of the other people, well, now it's freedom and democracy and so on, because it was beginning to be shallow in the beginning. You only have to think about what happened to Gorbachev to see that, what was done to Gorbachev, to see that the West lost an enormous chance to change the world for a better for a better pace. What we have now is, and these were with people like Stefan Heym or Christa Wolf. By the way, Stefan Heym, my first day in GDR, I never was in the GDR during all the years. My first day was the 10th of November 1989, one day after the wall came down. I drove with 3 friends to East Germany, and there were speeches delivered there. And I had heard unfortunately, on the day I was there in front of the Humboldt University, it was Stefan Heym was not talking, but he talked before, and he delivered a speech that Christa Wolf had written, also a writer, a similar person, one of the persons who said, and the bottom line was, we have to create a better socialism, and he got a roar of applause for that speech in the GDR. The idea was it went astray, it was bad, let's make it better. But then the people were simply overrun. And that became a topic of Heym afterwards, that he wrote about
it's very interesting. I mean, he was calling for a reformed socialist GDR, not for reunification. But of course, and it's very interesting, I would just say in the brackets.
He was not a member of the party.
Right.
He was in the parliament, and it was an open list. That was another thing that was possible at the time. You could vote for a person who you would trust, and they would have an open list. And Heym was the oldest member of the parliament, and then he delivered a speech, as that is the honor of the oldest member of the parliament when the new parliament starts. So Heym delivered a speech, and the Conservative Party, the Christian Democrats, they didn't applaud, except for Rita Süssmuth. Remember that name? She's a great person. She's a South German Protestant, a real one, yeah. And she always had an own mind. We had people in the parliament at that time who were really, truly independent. Hildegard Hambrücher, a liberal. She was of the Weiße Rose von Hans and Sophie Scholl, a member of that group. And also Rita Süssmuth. Rita Süssmuth went to Heym when their whole party did not applaud and gave him her hand to show that she was supporting him.
Well, can I just give some background now? So this was, we're fast forwarding from 90 to 94, and he was the oldest member of the Bundestag. Well, sorry, what do you want to say, Martin?
Quite a lot, actually, Pelle, if you let me in to say it. First of all, he dominated the Bundestag, and this is quite remarkable. Here's a man in his 80s from East Germany. And as Dirk says, he is the dominant political voice from the old East Germany in the new Bundestag. And unlike the generations that followed, like the Angela Merkel generation, he is not dancing on the GDR's grave. He defied it while it was alive. But once it was gone, he is very prescient, like Le Carré in Britain. He sees the future threat is going to come from the old anti-communist capitalists of the West, who will now have nothing to restrain them and are cutting loose and going berserk. And he's enormously prescient in this, not just in Germany, but in the whole West. And this is another reason why the failure to read him and know he even exists is so bad and lethal and devastating in Britain and America. Second point, he needs to be seen, I increasingly realize after Dirk's masterful presentation, that he and George Orwell and Alexander Solzhenitsyn are all very much in the same spectrum, in the same area of the spectrum, in the same continuum. They are all non-Marxist socialists for whom socialism really is about social justice and decency, but must never be allowed to degrade, as under Marxism it always does, into bureaucratic and monstrous tyranny. That's point two. But point three, and this is a hugely important point, his range is so vast. It's not just on modern German history. It's a key point Dirk made earlier, really applies on a wider scale. He understands how to control language. The King David Report is quite simply the best biblical novel ever written. It's all entirely based in one period, in really the late Bronze Age, beginning of the Iron Age, the era of King David and King Solomon. And it's the most credible and realistic reconstruction. He's clearly studied archaeology a very great deal. He clearly knows his Jewish sources. He's totally fluent in Hebrew as well as in English and German. And in the rabbinic backgrounds, it's all there. If you go back and check this out with scholars of Hebrew or ancient Aramaic or what have you, they confirm his accuracy in the greatest detail. But then he also writes a novel about censorship in England in the time of Queen Anne, where his hero is Daniel Defoe, one of the first of the great English dissidents, a figure whom Orwell also enormously admires. And it's, again, a very funny and brilliant book, but it's written in not just in impeccable English, it's written in impeccable 18th century, early 18th century Georgian English. And it could have been written at the time as it's meant to be. And of course, Dirk is laughing quite rightly because he understands this from the inside. I was an official, an employee, a very low-level employee of the British Academy of Arts and Sciences in London through the 1970s. And I worked for bureaucrats who were bifus. I had not read Heym at that point. I didn't know Heym existed. And even when I first read Heym, I loved the character of Bifrost, who was so repulsive, and you have to cheer when he comes to his absolutely hideous end. And Heym obviously hates him and enjoys hating him. Heym is not a conventional religious man. If he was a conventional Christian or a conventional Jew, he would feel guilty about hating people who deserve to be hated. But he's neither of those things, and he's totally unrepressed. And also, he loathes biblical fundamentalists. If you read the King David Report, the King David Report must would never be read, and I think would go on the banned list of heartland fundamentalists in my native Northern Ireland and all the way across heartland America. Because you cannot believe in the literal translation of the King James Bible once you have read the King David Report. It is a wonderful deconstruction of the way the first and second books of Samuel in the Old Testament in the Bible are actually written and why they were written. Why does it say this and why does it not say that? Why is there an account here of King David killing Goliath, and yet later on there was an account of Ben-Oya ben Yehoiada, who is Solomon's top general, boasts of killing a giant who might or might not have been Goliath. There are lots of contradictions in the actual text of the Bible. But what Heym does is he deconstructs this. He explains them. He understands how the bureaucracy.
I've got to wind up. We've got 3 minutes left.
The Bible is produced by a bureaucracy too.
Well, that's very interesting, isn't it? So basically, he's offering a behind-the-scenes look at how the Bible was actually written. In other words, it was written as a political tract by bureaucrats.
Exactly.
And we treat it literally, and in fact he rips away the scaffolding, and using his intelligence background and his experience in forgery and forging messages, he creates a plausible account of how the Bible might actually have been written. Well, we got 3 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask you a simple question. I mean, he sounds as if he's like a Arthur Koestler type, you know, a man of action in the middle of the 20th century. I'd read Koestler.
Not to create lies, but as you say, and as Dirk says, to strip away the scaffolding and reveal the truth.
So my question is, so he's much less famous than Koestler. I read Koestler even in my teens, you know, and his name was left, right, and center of the British public debate. I mean, he was always on Radio 4. I'll ask you both. You've got 2 minutes to answer. Why is he not known? Why is he unknown? Even I mean, I'm better read on these particular topics than nearly everyone in Britain at my age. I hadn't heard of him. I'll start off with you, Dirk.
Yeah, very good question. And I think it is because you cannot use him. He's not a partisan. So if you're a 3-year-old child and a girl in a situation where there's something unjust around him, you could rely on him for speaking out for this girl, not for anybody in power. And this is why I love him, why Martin loves him, but he's not usable as a tool for any political party.
Right. And Martin, what's your thoughts? We've got 1 minute left.
I completely agree with Dirk, and I'll add a very outrageous point, and something Dirk, you and I must talk with Pelle on a separate show. What would have happened to George Orwell if George Orwell had lived another 30 or 40 years instead of dying of tuberculosis at 46? He would be totally forgotten today because he would have been buried and repressed, because Orwell was just like Stefan Heym. They were both fearless men and they couldn't be used. Orwell's work is and his name are hijacked after he dies. But if he'd lived, because of the kind of man he was, and the same kind of man Stefan Heym was, he would have had to have been buried because, as Dirk said, bless him, no one could use him.
Right. Okay, so if you've read Orwell, and I guess a lot of people had, I mean, people read his essay on the English language. It was compulsory reading at journalism schools, and of course 1984 and Animal Farm are classics. Well, Stefan Heym really should be up there, but he isn't.
Oh, yeah.
And George Orwell's fortune was that he didn't live long enough to be a true sage, and then he would have been off the board of the list of required reading. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I'll be rushing to my Stefan Heym Amazon library. You can buy these books, and many of you will probably do the same by these two gentlemen who are such experts and fans. Thank you so much.